On today's podcast, I'm talking to Tom Hardin. Back in the mid-2000s, Tom was involved in one of the biggest insider trading prosecutions ever. He ended up, being an FBI informant, wearing a wire, and being involved in 80 or so convictions. We talk about that, how it happened, why it happened, what he's done his life ever since, particularly work as a speaker and mentor to young college students and wanting to go into the world of business and understanding the ethical challenges that they might face. Great conversation. I think you're going to love it. Enjoy. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. So happy to have you here. And I've got a great guest today. I've got Tom Hardin with me. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm so glad that Craig Stanley connected us earlier this year. I had Craig on the show, and he's got a amazing story of his own, and read his book. He's got a great book, and you will soon have a great book. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. And let me tell you a little bit about Tom before we get started. And I'm just going to sort of tease it out there, and then we're going to fill it in as we go along. From 2008 until 2012, Tom was a little-known U.S.-based financial analyst, and he assisted FBI agents in understanding how insider trading occurred in the financial services industry. As a young professional later implicated in the sting and known by his undercover moniker, Tipper X. Tom, what does the X stand for 10, or is there some meaning to the X? Or
yeah, the FBI just gave me that code name, Tipper X. So I didn't name myself that. I just found out later. But they pulled it. My firm's name had an X in the name, and they pulled it from there. So
Tipper X. Okay. Okay. Yeah. By the way, way to go. That was really good. So known by his undercover moniker Tipper X, Tom was tasked with wearing a covert body wire to help the FBI bring down some of its biggest targets in the industry, the financial services industry, leading to the largest Wall Street house cleaning campaign of a generation. There were over 80 convictions that you had a hand in, including your own.
That's correct.
Yeah. So you can learn all you need to know. Well, you can learn all you need to know about Tom here on this podcast, but you can also learn about Tom at his website, which is tipperx.com. Tom at tipperx.com is his email. Do you want me to give you your phone number? Because you're open for business, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So phone number is 201-663-3957. I think you can find him on all the socials at his name, Tom Hardin, Hardin. And Tom, I start every show with the same simple question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
Yeah, so it's a circuitous route. I think it's entrepreneurship. I was a young analyst, as you said in the bio beforehand, and to finish that story, I received 4 stock tips on inside information, and we can talk about what that means. Made some trades I shouldn't have, broke the law. Got approached by the FBI on the street, asking them, they confronted me about my trades. I confessed to it immediately. They asked me to help them clean up the industry. So I worked undercover for 2 years for the FBI, wearing a body wire, which of course we're going to talk about, getting people of interest to the FBI in these conversations. Never had any plans to ever talk about my experience. I was in my 20s through my career way doing something very foolish. In 2016, the FBI called me. They said I was the youngest person they charged in these 80 plus cases, and would I come share my story at the FBI in New York City? I did that, and a couple agents there gave me the idea to go out and share the story. So what I've been doing now the past 6 years is serving as a usually like compliance training, which anybody listening in a big company, compliance training can be pretty dry and forgettable. So I come in as a guest speaker to companies, financial services, but just outside finance too, talking about my slippery slope and how it can happen in the industry and what we should be looking at inside corporate culture and that type of thing. So that's where I am today. That's how it sort of all happened, but there's more to it than just that. So
yeah, and when the FBI approached you initially for the very first time, Tom, where were you?
So I was dropping off some dry cleaning. I lived in Manhattan. It was 6:30 in the morning on Tuesday, July 8th, 2008. Dropping off dry cleaning before getting a taxi to the office. I stepped on the sidewalk and this guy behind me said, "Are you Tom?" I turned around, two agents, dark suits, FBI, wallets out, come sit down with us. So that was how I was approached by the FBI. They said that they knew I was down at my nephew's baptism in Atlanta 2 days ago that weekend. So they had been tracking me for a while. And so that's how it all happened on the street.
And so take us from that point, like not from that point, but to that point, Tom. So you're on the street in Manhattan, you're 28 years old, you're dropping off your dry cleaning. The FBI asks, like they didn't know, are you Tom Hardin? Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am.
I am.
So how did you get to be on that street corner at 6:30 a.m.?
Yeah, so I just going all the way back. I grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. Was a good student, public high schools. Got accepted to University of Pennsylvania, Wharton there in Philadelphia. So great university. Kind of an overachiever, great student, athlete in high school. Went to Wharton, so I was there in the late 1990s for my undergrad. Everybody that I kind of looked up to at that time, as far as a career, was what's called a hedge fund manager. These are individuals who are some of the highest paid people in the world and still are. So I think, Mike, when I was young and in college, it was all about being driven by the money and what these guys were making. And I was really, really drawn to that. But the work also seemed interesting. So I graduated undergrad, started working in the hedge fund industry in 2000. There's probably people who may not be familiar with that. So a hedge fund is basically a pool of capital that's managed by a hedge fund manager. It's usually invested into public stocks, and it's the clients are usually like endowments or pensions or those types of large institutional pools of capital, where the hedge fund manager, no matter what the stock market does, you're supposed to be able to make money and outperform every year, because not only can you buy stocks and bet that they're going to go up, you can also short stocks and bet that they're going down. So some of my biggest trades that I looked at in my career, just to give it a familiar example, when Google became public in the early 2000s, there was 5 yellow page companies that were publicly traded. And if you really did the analysis, you could kind of figure out at some point, I want to own Google and I want to be short those 5 yellow page companies, because they're probably going away at some point, looking at this company called Google. So you could make generational wealth on one trade like that if you held onto Google for the next 10 or 15 years and watch those other yellow page companies go to zero. And that's what people do. It was a very meritocratic or organization. I'm in my 20s. If you pick the right stocks, you could be paid millions of dollars in your early 20s. So there was nothing like that I could ever see out there, like actually being able to be paid and compensated when it was all quantifiable. So for me, there was no politics, there was no this or that. It was an awesome industry and I loved it. Just if something happens in Asia, how is that going to affect the US markets the next day? And thinking through all the gyrations of that, for me in my 20s, graduating college was really something I was attracted to.
And what about before you got to college, Tom? What were you thinking about? I mean, getting into the Wharton School at Penn that's a big deal. Even, that's always been a big deal. It's a big deal. You had to be excited about that. Your parents had to be excited about that. But what were you thinking about what you were going to become as a result of being accepted there in your experience?
Yeah, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I mean, I was the first person ever from my family to leave the South and attend university. I thought at first I might major in accounting just because my successful parents of my friends were tax accountants, in Georgia, so that may be something I might do. But then quickly by sophomore year, I really got into looking at investing and working at the student investment fund, where we had some money from alumni to kind of get us involved in the markets. And so I was pretty much hooked, sophomore year, following sort of the classic kid reading the Wall Street Journal, looking at the quotes and that type of thing, and trying to figure out what makes stocks move up and down.
And when you got there, so initially as a freshman, you get there, were you feeling like you belonged?
No, not at all. Not at all. This was, it was very difficult freshman year just to adjusting to the college life there, because everybody's valedictorian, top of their class. I knew that going in, but I underestimated as a freshman how to manage my time in college. So, and also because college was usually just 2 set pieces for your grade, it was the midterm and the final. And so you only had, if you screwed up one of those, your grades, really, really messed up. So It took me a while to adjust to test taking. I got a C on my Econ 101 midterm, which everybody in Wharton took. So I thought, oh my God, my life's over. A C. I've never gotten a C in my life. And I called my dad, and he was pretty straightforward. He's like, "Hey, you got in. Just graduate. You're going to get a job, right? You're at this great school. So let's put it in perspective. You're with the best, brightest in the world here. You're there. Just graduate, and you can improve from a C, right? Get a B minus next on the final. So that's where
I don't think that's unusual either, because when you come out of a high school, it's a small, it's a small pool, right? And even if you're doing great there and you get into an elite institution like any Ivy and a lot of others, right? That sort of, it's like being an athlete and going to the next level, right? You were awesome, right? Now you're around a lot of people who are awesome. Instead of the 3 or 4 people who are awesome, everybody's awesome, right?
Yeah, and it really raises your game, right? I mean, just those conversations at midnight in the dorm room with somebody down the hall from India, somebody from Australia, just talking about their views of the world, very much different than mine growing up, sort of sheltered in Georgia, and like, wow, this is a big world I didn't know existed. And so it was great in terms of just raising my game and how I prepared then for classes going forward. I improved my grades all the way to senior year, was able to get a great job out of that.
And by the time you were a senior looking to graduate, how were you feeling? So as a freshman, you were feeling like, oh, this is, new, maybe uncertain, challenging. By the end, how were you feeling?
I was feeling pretty confident, at least in my finance courses. I still got I got a C, I think, in marketing. So I was definitely not focused on the classes that weren't interesting to me, but I was pretty much certain as to where I was going to be. And I had a great summer internship before my senior year at an investment bank in Los Angeles called DLJ. It's no longer around, but younger people can Google that.
Is that Donaldson, Lufkin?
That's right. Donaldson, Lufkin,
Jenrette. Okay.
Yeah, Jenrette. So I worked in a gentleman called Ken Mullis, his group out there, he has his own bank now, Mullis and Company. So that was a great summer internship, and they gave me a full-time offer. So going into senior year, it was so awesome to have that offer from the summer, and sort of, again, DLJ was just saying, just graduate, you come back. So you can imagine I dipped a little bit senior year, I think, with my grades, because that was what's what they
because you had something in the
I was pretty confident. Yeah, pretty confident I have a job.
Did you, so let me just stay with this Penn experience for a minute. So you're around all of these people. You're in the Wharton School, which is, most of the students, I guess, in that are looking toward finance or some finance related thing for their career business. Were you sort of, I guess, this feeling like, oh, I want to make a lot of money, or, this, like you said, if I make this one trade, it could, generate or produce generational wealth over time, that kind of thing. Was there a real focus on that amongst your classmates or colleagues or friends when you were there, or was it not so much?
No, there was a real focus on that. I mean, that's what, and maybe not so much the money, but the prestige of where you get that first job. So if you get the Goldman Sachs job or the Morgan Stanley job or the Blackstone job, like those were great starting points in your resume. So there was some competition around that in the interview process. And so it was a very, very competitive group of people that I think just helped me raise my level of performance and what I needed to bring to the classroom and to the test and to the interviews and all that to be able to get one of those top jobs.
Okay. And so you start at DLJ. What are you doing, and how does it feel, and where are you? And
yeah, so I started at DLJ the fall of 1999. Investment banking programs are sort of the boot camp for finance, where you're putting in 80, 90, 100-hour weeks. Being the lowest man on the totem pole, you're sort of doing more of the manual grunt work, like processing pitches for clients and that type of thing. So I wasn't using all the analytical tools I learned in school, but I learned pretty quickly, like what you learn in school, even at Penn, sometimes it doesn't apply to the real world. So I was just doing the grunt work, putting in all-nighters. There was one week where I put in 3 all-nighters over 7 days. And what would happen is the managing directors, the senior people, would leave at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and say, have this on my desk at 8 in the morning. And sometimes you're sitting around all day waiting to do something to get some work, and then it all comes at 5 p.m. So then, you're not going home. And so I did that. It's usually a 2 or 3 year program where you learn so much. It's a great way to start your career. I would still recommend people interested in finance to take that, gut out that boot camp, because it's just going to set you up. You get 10 years of knowledge in 2 or 3 years, and then you can go do what you want to do. but I only lasted about 6 months after my third all-nighter. A friend who worked at a hedge fund, which I just explained in Greenwich, Connecticut, gave me a call and said that they were hiring somebody to cover tech stocks for them. And so that was my January 2000 experience, leaving Los Angeles with Santa, just in Santa Claus, with Santa in shorts, going to Greenwich, Connecticut when we had 18 inches of snow, flying in there to the airport in New York. So it was leaving the West Coast to the East Coast.
And what was it that attracted you besides, you mentioned, having to work these all-nighters, which, by the way, before I go further on that, you were kind enough to explain a hedge fund. And I talk about investment banking here and there on the show, but I don't think most people have an understanding of what an investment bank or an investment banker really is or does. Can you help with that?
Sure. Yeah. So an investment bank does financings. They do IPOs. So anybody watching, the IPO market the last couple of years, these companies, Netflix or all the big tech companies, Google, Facebook, over 10 years ago, these IPOs, the bankers put together, they'll take a percentage of fee on, whatever Facebook raised in their IPO, they take a fee, they take fees on financing, they finance acquisitions. And so what you're doing is you have a Rolodex of clients, usually the person at the top, the managing director, is always pitching their clients, hey, you should buy this company, it'll increase your market share in this industry, or you should look at offering stock because your stock's up a lot. So they're always pitching their clients to try to get those fees on those transactions. So it's a very transactional business, and there's league tables every year that rank the banks based on the amount of fee revenue they generate. So always at the top is a Goldman Sachs or a Morgan Stanley. Those would be familiar names, publicly traded names that people might know.
Okay, so thanks for that. And so now, besides the all-nighters and stuff, because there's lots of, well, I don't know how many hedge funds are in, well, you got Silicon Valley. I mean, you got everything out in California. So why come back to New York or to the East Coast at all?
Yeah, no, it was just, it's something that I thought I'd probably do after my 2 or 3 years at the investment bank. So at first I go in at 22 thinking I'll do this till 24, 25, and then go to that hedge fund route, learn a bunch. But I think I was just disillusioned with the sort of the processing grunt work I was doing, and I wasn't patient. And the one person who ran this fund, this hedge fund, was, I want to say he was maybe 32 years old. In 1999, he made an ungodly amount of money, during the dot-com boom in the stock market. And so I was looking at him as sort of like, maybe that could be me, in 10 years at 32 years old doing that too. He was a great sales guy to me in terms of taking the job, and just laid it out that I would sort of have complete control over my sort of future compensation. If I pick good stocks, there's no BS about it. You get compensated for the stocks you pick. And I just like that meritocracy in terms of being able to move up quickly at such a young age. It was sort of like there was 12 analysts at the firm. Sometimes I make the analogy of kind of like an NBA team where everybody's expected to perform. If you don't perform, you're going to get cut, but you're also really well taken care of. At the office every Friday, like a masseuse came around with the table. Here I am, a 23 years old guy from Georgia, like getting a massage. So it was pretty cool perks, which I enjoyed, and got to take cool trips. So the investment banks were also our client. We were clients of the investment banks now because we traded through them. So they wanted our commission dollars. So I went on some fantastic trips, like twice to the Kentucky Derby, played flag football one time with Michael Vick. It was a crazy experience at such a young age. So it was awesome. I loved it. High intensity again, though, not the 100 hours, but the 70, 80-hour weeks in terms of working all around, looking at Asia, Europe. So I knew that, but I also knew if I picked the right stocks and had some big years, I could start sort of that path to generational wealth.
So you said you were a competitive athlete in high school. Were you able to compete with Mike Vick on the football field?
Yeah, no, wasn't able to beat Mike Vick. Probably not now either. He was in his prime. I think it was one of those. Each team had a quarterback. I forget who the other quarterback was, but
okay.
Mike Vick didn't have to throw it to us, as people know. He just run it in. So
yeah, well, yeah, he was good at that, even with a bunch of pros around him. But interestingly too, Mike got himself wrapped up with the dog thing, right? He ended up. I think he ended up in prison as well. Or you didn't end up in prison. Right. You got parole or probation, but interesting. So explain the office setup here. You said 12 analysts. Were you guys in like on a trading desk where everyone's sort of right there listening to each other, doing that kind of deal, or was it different there?
Hey, everybody, just a quick pause here to let you know how much I appreciate that you've made time for my podcast. If you're not already a subscriber, please become one today. Leave a review and tell a friend. Now, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, it was very much like you describe it. So the 12 people in the investment team, I think there was two offices of 6 people each, just sort of around like a horseshoe type setup with computers. The boss had the big office with people. Maybe people have seen these screens where it's like the 14 screen
Oh
sort of
yeah.
setup with every market in the world going. You can just sort of Google hedge fund manager setup and see these setups that he had. I mean, it had to be at least a dozen screens just set up everywhere. And at the time, I think it was right before the flat screens came out. So we those big tube screens, which must have been a ton of screens on his desk. So he had that set up. And then we had a trading floor downstairs. The trading floor was more the execution, like he would yell down buy or sell. And the people on the bottom were more just taking the orders, what we call more execution type people, where the investment team comes up with the ideas upstairs. We pitch it to him. He grills us on that. If he likes it, he yells down the order. So that's kind of how it worked in the office.
Okay. And I forgot to ask you earlier. Were your parents able to pay for Penn, or did you come out of there with a lot of debt, or how did that work?
So luckily, I was able to get quite a bit of grant money based on my sort of financial need at that time. But I was also able to get an ROTC scholarship that paid for
Oh,
tuition. And at the end of 1999, I wrote to the Pentagon, "Hey, could I pay this back? I'd really like to go into finance, but of course, I'll fulfill my obligation if I can't do that." And I guess because it was before 9/11, they would let people convert these scholarships to loans. So I converted that big scholarship to a huge loan when I graduated, but then I came into this career where I could pay it back over a few years. So I was able to finance it that way. But today, I think I would serve. I think it's a 4 or 5 year commitment, with that in the armed services. But that's how I
okay.
financed most of my education.
I see. So, and the reason for that was you saw this sort of immediate future to make, to make a good
Yeah,
living,
to
or
be
what was
honest,
there anything else to it?
it was really just I saw this immediate future of what I wanted to be doing. The Air Force would have had me as a finance officer, coming out of Penn, which wasn't as glamorous. I didn't have the vision I needed to be a pilot, so I didn't qualify sophomore year to be a pilot. That's what I really thought I might do if I had to serve in the Air Force. Who doesn't want to be who go for that? But I didn't have the vision necessary or the hearing. Actually, I have had ear surgeries as a child over the years on the tubes in my eardrums, and it just wasn't
Okay.
up to the par that you need. So they said, "Okay, Tom, you're going to be a finance officer." And I asked them, could I just write so and so and ask them if they'd be able to convert this to a loan for me? And they said, yeah, they do this for a few people every year. It's no harm in asking, and they were able to do that. So it
Ah,
became sort of a big loan like we students have today, just graduating with a lot of debt. So
okay. And yeah, I'm glad I asked that, because it probably gets a little bit to, what's going on in your head. You take this DLJ job, then you get offered this hedge fund job, eat what you kill, a lot of perks to it, a lot of, it's an environment where you start to probably feel like, maybe not like, hey, I've made it, but man, I'm, there's something special going on here. Like, it can get to
yeah.
your head, right? Like,
Oh,
hey,
absolutely gets to your head. It gets to your
yeah,
head with if you have a couple big years and you're 25 and able to kind of do whatever you want, and there's the vices and all that stuff that can creep into life. So definitely that at a young age. And so yeah, you kind of start to feel like, oh, I've already made it and I know everything, and I think that crept in a little bit too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So you come from modest family, in Georgia. You come to well, maybe Philly is the big city to some, but it's certainly a bigger city. Well, maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's not bigger than Atlanta. I'm not sure how close. But anyway, you you come, you do really well, ROTC. You're able to get your way out of that, get hired for a big job, then another big job, and life looks pretty. Life looks like you're going to hit it out of the park, right?
Yeah, it looks amazing. I met the woman that year that I eventually would marry when I was 27, and like, I mean, everything was on track in terms of like you're supposed to sort of go through life and check all those boxes. I mean, it was on track until it wasn't. which
until it
we
wasn't.
can talk about.
And then of course that manifests itself on July 8th, right? July 8th is when
so
they come. So
just to finish, just to fill in those details.
Go ahead.
I knew that other players in the industry at this time, so I got this job in Greenwich immediately. My boss is friends with a guy named Raj Rajaratnam, who is one of the biggest sort of kingpins charged by the FBI. He just got out of prison, I think last year, just wrote a book. So I knew what he was up to. He would just talk about trading on inside information. Other people would talk about this, how they would get tips from contacts inside companies. And so inside information, just to clarify that, it's illegal if you trade a stock, if you buy a stock on information that's called material information. So if it's material enough to move the stock price, if it's non-public, so if it's not available through Google or through newspapers or whatever, just if it's not available to the public. So those are the two key sort of areas. And then the third is if it's obtained in a breach of duty. So if somebody at the company breached their duty as an employee of that company and leaked that information, then it's illegal insider trading. So give an example. If I walked to Starbucks here in Westwood, New Jersey and said, what are your sales numbers this quarter at the store? And they told me it doesn't move the stock. It's one store of thousands of store. If I fly to Seattle and play golf with the CFO of Starbucks and say, Wall Street thinks you're going to earn $1 this quarter, and he says, no, we're going to earn 80 cents. Then if I own Starbucks and I call home and say to my wife, sell our Starbucks stock, it's going to be a bad earnings report. I've actually just broken the law. I could go to prison for that.
As has he, right? The CFO in this, as has he, the CFO in this particular.
Right, exactly. Yeah. That's right. He breached the duty. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, and so
I knew this was going on.
Yeah, go ahead. When you said, by the way, hold on, Tom. When you said he, did you mean your boss at the hedge fund, or did you mean Raj?
Oh no, my boss at the hedge fund had friends who were also hedge fund managers that were getting this information, trading stocks. I knew it was going on, Mike, but I never really felt at that point, age 22, 23, 24, that I needed to cross that line and do that. I was already doing quite well, as I said, making a name for myself. There was 1 month where they even gave me a trophy 1 month because in June of 2001, I was up every day of the month except for 2 days. And so my boss actually had a little thing after work and presented me with a trophy, like in terms of like the hit rate was unbelievable. And so I was doing great. And then sort of getting through my career, I took that fund closed down. We had a bad year in 2002 in the tech stock crash. And so my boss had made all his money he wanted and just closed it down. I took another job and sort of into my late 20s, like 60% of companies that were acquired had these unexplained spikes in their stock prices. So if you saw in the news, company A is going to buy company B's stock price would be going up weeks and weeks before that news came out. So this was really going on big time in the market. The information was leaking. And in my second job, just to backtrack, so my second job was just me, the boss, and that's it. So now I actually own a piece of this fund. So I'm now a partner. I've worked my way up at 28 to be a partner in a hedge fund. So again, on the right track. We actually lost money in the first quarter of investing for clients in 2006. It shouldn't have mattered because we were investing with a 5-year horizon. After losing money in the first quarter, my boss came into my office, closed the door and said, Tom, I know we're investing for the next 5 years, like the Google and Yellow Page trade, which is going to take years and years to play out. But we just lost money in the first 3 months. Tom, we have to start looking for shorter term opportunities to make money every month. And he closed the door. But Mike, I didn't ask the question, do you mean anything goes at this point? Or what do you mean by that? I didn't ask the clarifying questions. And so I took that to mean like, hey, if I get one of these hot tips, like these other guys are getting, it's okay to trade. And it happened a few months later where a woman who had worked for Raj Rajaratnam called me and said she knew about a deal happening where a company was going to be bought by a private equity firm next week, like this day, this price by this private equity firm. And so I got that tip. I didn't trade on it that day, but I shared it with a friend at another firm. He bought it. He shared it with everybody in his firm. They're buying the stock. He calls me back and said, Tom, did you buy some? And when a person commits a crime, usually employee fraud, it's called the fraud triangle. There's usually 3 reasons. There's a need to commit the crime, an opportunity, or a rationalization. And Mike, I can tell you, I just rationalized it. I said, all these other guys are doing it. What would I hurt buying a small amount of stock? And I bought a less than 1% position in our portfolio in this stock, thinking it's such a small trade. I would never be caught for this. If these guys are making millions of dollars, I would never be caught for this small trade. I did that same fact pattern 4 times through 2007. She would call these small trades. And then fast forwarding to July of 2008, the FBI was in my face about those 4 trades.
So this woman, Tom, I believe it's Rumi Khan. Is that the
That's
woman?
right. That's right. Yeah.
Why you? Why did she call you?
Yeah, that's what the FBI asked me eventually. Like, because it's usually if a person tips another person, they know they're probably going to get reciprocation of that tip back. Like, okay, I'm going to give you information, Mike, because you're going to give me information maybe next month. We sort of scratch each other back, so like the quid pro quo. And so I think she was 20 years older than me. She only talked to a few people in the industry. She wasn't that likable. And so when I saw her at conferences, I would talk to her. And so I think she kind of latched onto me as somebody that she could mentor. She's 20 years older than me. And so she called me kind of as a favor. Here's a piece of information. She said, Tom, you made me a lot of money over the last few years. Every year I'd say, here's my sort of stock of the year. I think it's going to do this or that. And here's why. She told me I made her a bunch of money. So it was kind of a gift to me. Like, here's something for you. We had talked before about other people in the industry blatantly doing this. And I didn't expect it to ever fall in my lap so explicitly as that. Like, it literally fell in my lap with the phone call. And so I didn't trade the first day. I thought about it. I talked to my friend sort of as a sounding board. He's all in. So I think that influenced me a little bit. Like, oh, he's really loading up on this, which again, I could be charged for insider trading just by sharing that before I even tipped. Like, before I even traded. I didn't even trade the stock yet, but because he's buying stock on the information I shared, I could have been charged at that point. So she shares it with me. It happened 3 more times. On the 3rd trade, Mike, she actually called me and she said, okay, this is the 3rd one. The guy that's giving her the information wants $15,000. So she's sort of setting me up, I think, here for this kind of cash payoff. She said, Tom, can you write him a check? I said, no, I can't write him a check. That sounds illegal. I started to freak out a little bit when she said she gave this guy my name. Like, I don't want to be involved in this. I'm just buying a little bit about the stock. Like, I don't want to know about your conspiracy or what you're doing. But I called my friend who I had tipped and said, can you pass the hat around? He gets $15,000 in cash together, gives it to me. I'm literally going through LaGuardia Airport in New York to give it to her in California. Made it through security, got out to California, gave it to her. So it started with the first trade, but by the 3rd trade, I'm literally carrying cash to the airport in my body to give that to her. So I'm all in at that point. There's no going back.
So a couple of things. What's the amount of time between the first one and the 3rd one? Not much. You said
the first
this whole
one
thing was 1 year.
the first one was March, and the 3rd one was probably July. So
pretty quick, like
the last
a quarter.
one was September. Yeah,
like a quarter. And when she told you about the first tip, how were you sure that she had insider information? Like, I'm trying to connect with that because it feels to me like there's some plausible deniability there. You're like, hey, I don't know. This is Rumi. She's not involved with the company. I don't know how she knew this.
That was going to be my excuse if I was ever asked by my boss, like, hey, I talked to her. She's literally full of rumors. She was sort of a rumor monger, always calling with, hey, I'm hearing this out of Silicon Valley. I'm hearing that. Most of those rumors aren't even true. So to your point, Mike, the first time I thought, this sounds like very specific information, but how do I even know? Like, I'm starting to convince myself, I don't know if she's even talking to somebody who has this information, but why not? Like, I'll buy the stock. If this event doesn't occur, I'll just sell the stock. It's not that big of a deal. It's a small position. And then one day, in front of my Bloomberg screen, which is all the stock, the blinking stock screen terminals that we all had, I see that the stock she told me about was halted for trading, and word for word, exactly what she said. So I'd love to tell you that I panicked and thought, oh my God, this is actually happening. This is not a rumor. This is exact information. But I hate to say it. I got like an endorphin rush. Like, oh my God, now I'm part of this in-group in the industry who knows about this information. Like, I never thought I'd be part of this. I don't have these contacts, but all of a sudden here I am playing this game. The next conference I went to the next week where I knew these other guys were doing it, I told them I knew about this deal. One of the guys said, Tom, you don't know about these things. This is our world. Tom Hardin actually does real work on companies. I said, no, I do that, but I can also do this too. And I know about this next one coming, the second one. And one of the guys sort of put his arm around me and said, now you're part of our group. So I think back in my 20s of not being a part of that illicit in group. And then once I was part of that group, I kind of felt like I belonged, which we can all play these psychological games with ourselves. But I think looking back now, plenty of time to reflect on this, that was part of it too. It wasn't about the money. On these 4 trades, personally, I made $46,000, which in the context of a career, is nothing in terms of throwing a career away. But I think it was more about having that status and now being a part of that in group.
And first of all, had anyone called you as blatantly as I don't want to say blatant, as detailed of information as Rumi did before, then you were just like, no, not going to do it?
No, I mean, there was always rumors like, Tom, I'm hearing this about Intel Semiconductor. I'm hearing this about Qualcomm Semiconductor company, but it was never like, hey, this company is going to buy this company in a few weeks. Here's the price and here's the date. Like, even somebody not in the industry can kind of at least surmise that sounds, if not illegal, I mean, close to the line, over the line. So that was the first time. And so that's why I waited, I think, like, okay, this sounds illegal to me. So let me call my friend and vet this with him. And he's excited and he's all in and he tells his entire firm. And then as we can rationalize anything, I thought, well, these guys are going to make millions of dollars on this information I just gave him. I should make a little something too. And I could buy a stock in the portfolio and not have to talk to my boss as long as it was less than the 1% that we manage for clients. So that was kind of like the lax control that we had in terms of me being able to buy a stock in the portfolio too, because it was so small. Yeah. So I had several small positions where, hey, I'm just doing research, boss. I just bought a little bit about a stock. I'm going to do more research. So under the context of just me starting to do research, that's how I got the stock in the portfolio. But the boss also never asked the questions about these 4 well-timed trades, and we could touch on that too at some point.
Well, yeah. So I want to touch on that now. So because you've got this older woman who's experienced, right? She's offering you something exclusive, right? So you might feel like, oh, we have a good relationship, right? And she's trying to help me out, and then you share it, and at least after the first couple of trades, it creates a club for you, right? It creates like, hey, my status just got elevated with these people, or at least I think it did, because of this, because of what I've done, right? It's kind of so I'm kind of the hero, and then you can further rationalize that. And when I say you, I don't mean just you. This can happen to anybody, right? Because then you can further rationalize it by saying, hey, everybody's doing it. What's the harm? This is actually, being in the club is part of that's one of the goals, right? Or whatever. Right. And all of a sudden you're a couple trades in, and then, or you're whether it's a couple trades in, you're a couple lies in, you're a couple of deceits in, you're a couple of whatever's in. And all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm here, so must be okay, right? We'll just ride it. We'll just, Yeah,
but you could still see it going on in the market even after my 4th trade, which is the final trade. It was only the final trade because the information stopped coming. I mean, this could have been a multi-year conspiracy where it was 4 a year for 5 years. And what if it was 20 trades? Right. The FBI approaches me on the street. I'm probably looking at a lot of jail time because of the amount of money I would have made by then. So in some respects, I might be even lucky that the FBI stopped me after 4 trades and say, hey, we know what you're doing. You got to cut it out now. And so.
Well, plus you have a lot going for you at that time, right? You got, hey, working for a firm, the boss, basically said, hey, turn to blind eye, whatever. You're young, you're, being influenced, you could be influenced, all these things. Well, first I ask you, why did it stop? Why did someone get to her and then it stopped? Like maybe she was already like, oh, I'm caught up in this, so she couldn't give you.
I think somebody got to her maybe. So either the FBI can bring the criminal charges, or the SEC is the regulator, they can bring the civil charges.
Okay.
I didn't know this, Mike, but this was like not made public until she was arrested, that she had actually already been charged for insider trading in 2001. That was never public because they wanted to use her as a cooperating witness against Raj Rajaratnam way back then. And after 9/11, the FBI kind of dropped that case because they were focused on counterterrorism, resources at that point. So I didn't know she was already a convicted felon. And I've only heard secondhand through other FBI agents that they knocked on her door and they said, "We can't believe you've done this again. Like, who does this crime
Right.
twice? There's probably some psychopathy there. And here's the lawyer you used last time. Who did you tell this information to?" And I'm guessing at that point, Mike, she gave the FBI, my name, "Hey, Tom Hardin, Raj, and I'm like, this is who I tipped. And so she called me at the end of 2007. She was panicked. She told me that she had been approached by the regulator, the SEC, asking her about one of the trades. What should she say? And I think at that point, she was probably wearing a wire on me because she was trying to get me to tell her what she should say to cover up the crime, which that would imply that I knew that we were doing something illegal, as I learned with the FBI later how to get people to talk about these corrupt trades. And so I think she was probably wired up on me at that point.
And how did how did the self-justification that we've talked about, how did it change when you were asked to pay money and you had to actually, get on the plane with the money and deliver it? That sort of changes things, it seems like.
It's one thing to justify a couple of mouse clicks and buy some stock and I'm not hurting anybody, but to actually have cash on your body and going through an airport, that's a whole nother level. And to be honest, I look back at that and think, what was I thinking? Was it the thrill of actually doing this and going through the airport and getting through? I think it was some of that, but also I just panicked because she told me that the guy who was giving her the information knew who I was. I wasn't thinking clearly at all. Like I could have stopped there and said, F no, I'm not getting cash together and going through an airport. We're going to stop this conspiracy now. Like, what is this guy going to do? Go to the FBI and say, Tom isn't paying me my bribe? So I could have stopped it there, Mike, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I panicked. I called the friend and he gave me the cash. So went through the airport, made it through the TSA screening machine. I'm not sure how I actually made it through. I don't think I would today now, but at that time, made it through and actually got stopped. So when I was boarding the flight, there was 2 TSA agents there checking people's carry-ons, which I've never had happen again ever on a flight. And they actually checked my carry-on. They flipped through the cash and they just told me to have a nice day. So they never said anything, but I sat on my seat in the plane and thought at that point, it sort of hit me like, my God, what the heck am I doing? Like this is I'm way over my skis here. Yeah.
And then that, of course, that jumps to another level at the dry cleaner, right? So you get
so we're finally the July of 2008.
we're finally back there. Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it was important to hit all those high points, but July 2008, they're there on the street. They know about me visiting my nephew in Atlanta. And my first thought was, oh my God, my dad's going to kill me. What's he going to say? Because I'm still very close with him in my 20s. All he could talk about was my success, Wharton School, hedge fund.
Right.
And I have to tell him about this. I'm going to have to break his heart. And I thought, oh my God, my wife's going to leave me. She had no idea about these 4 trades. I never talked to her. And thinking back, if I had at least voiced this to her and she was not my industry, I think she had the moral compass to would have been saying like, what are you thinking doing something like this? But I didn't talk to her. And then I thought, oh my God, I might be going to prison. So it went from dad to prison first. That was I wasn't first like, oh my God, I might be going to prison, but it was like, oh my God, I'm going to disappoint so many people with what's about to happen in my life. But then it went to, oh my God, I might be going to prison. I started telling the FBI everything. I didn't make them play any tapes. The FBI got excited. They were writing things down. I even told them about the cash payoff. They got really excited. They looked at each other and wrote things down. So I don't know what they knew. I wasn't under arrest. I could have left, but I wasn't thinking about, let me call my defense attorney. I'm not thinking about ever being caught for this because I was making such small trades. I never thought I'd ever get caught. And I didn't think I made a lot of money. I didn't even know the amount of money I made until I had to pay it back. And it was sort of shocking to see Tom threw away his career at 29 years old for $46,000. Like that's what I paid back. I told the FBI everything. And then they said, Tom, I'm a small fish in the bigger sort of scheme of these cases they're building. They showed me a web of insider trading tipping charts and names that were all whited out. They had 2 big targets at the top of this chart. So I assume one of those guys was Roger Rottenham. The agent gave me his card. I said, should I talk to an attorney before I help you guys? And one of the agents said, we'll let you know when you can do that. So they're playing by their own rules too. They're just trying to build these cases. Like I should have known. I watched enough Law and Order that I could at least call the attorney after that and go through what happened. But I didn't. Later that day, I went to the office. My face was white, but it was the financial crisis, so my face was white every day. It was 2008. We were not doing well. I went to St. Patrick's for a confession. Actually, at lunch, I just converted to Catholicism 2 years prior. My wife was Catholic through RCIA. It was a great time for a confession. Talked to one of the priests at St. Patrick's there in Manhattan about what happened, and he said, Tom, it sounds like 99% of your life you did the right thing, but 1% of your life you really screwed up. But he said, don't let that 1% of your life here define what you're thinking about yourself, what you've done. I don't know if I was suicidal, but I was as depressed as I've ever been in my life. And he said, if the FBI is giving you a chance to kind of start making amends, you should do that. So I left St. Patrick's, called the FBI and said, I don't understand what it means to help you build cases. What do you mean? I was so naive. And they're like, Tom, you're going to have to wear a body wire for us.
Hey everyone, if you like what I'm doing with this podcast and want to participate in more of the things I'm thinking about and exploring, subscribe to my newsletter today. It's super simple. Just go to mikemalatesta.com right now, put in your email, and you will get the very next issue. It's short, thoughtful, and designed to inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you.
Yeah, okay. And that had to be you thought carrying cash through the airport was freaky, right? Now
so I'm like, what's a body wire? I thought it was something taped to my chest. At the time, I'm sure the technology is different now. I'm pretty sure it is. It was the size of like, remember we had Blackberries and they had these like 1-inch batteries in the back. So it was the size of those batteries in the Blackberry. It was in my front pocket, a dress shirt pocket. And I'd go around the conferences and other firms or meet people for coffee, getting them in conversations about perhaps one time they traded one stock on inside information. I didn't know whether they had or not because I wasn't privy to their actual trading, but I knew people by reputation enough to know that like, okay, this is a guy who's probably engaged in this behavior, maybe a disciple or former employee of some of these bigger players in the industry. Let me get them in a conversation, build a relationship. And some of these guys, I'm in my 20s, they're well into their 40s, they're centillionaires, like they're just taking the meeting as sort of like a mentor meeting. And I told them I had those 4 trades and how did they do it. And eventually people would start talking to me about how they got their illicit information. And so I wore a body wire like this for 2 years, running around, getting people in these conversations.
So I have 2 questions. I'll start with the confession, not with the priest, but the confession with your wife. When did that happen, that first confession?
Yeah. So the FBI approached me on Tuesday morning. They told me I could only tell my wife about this. I couldn't tell my parents or anybody else. So I thought, how am I going to do that? We had just gotten married 2 years prior. I thought, oh my gosh, she's going to leave me. I waited till Friday. So those 3 nights I was having bed sweats, panic attacks, getting up. So I think she knew something was up. I mean, I usually keep it light, like to joke around. And then Friday after work, we had just sort of glass of wine before going to dinner, young couple in New York City. How was your week? And I said, well, let me go first. And so sat her down, told her what happened. And I think she was so shocked. She was like, can you say that? Like, it didn't process the first time. And I said it again. And the way she took it, Mike, she's like, you didn't do anything against me. I think she was thinking it could have been something worse in her mind. Maybe infidelity would have been worse to her. Even though it's not a felony, maybe that would have been worse to her. But she's like, she went away for a while, then sort of came back and said, look, you got us into this. You're going to somehow get us out of this. And so 85% of marriages would have ended right there. I mean, anytime a spouse gets a felony, it's usually, understandably, she didn't marry Tom Hardin, the felon. She married who I was, before this. So,
right.
And we didn't have kids. So it would have been very easy at that point for her to hoist the sails and just say, I don't even know this guy. Like this whole thing was going on, the 4 trades. I didn't know it was happening. But it wasn't easy, but she stayed with me. And so that was very important, I think, in terms of my mental health. Again, probably not suicidal, but had she walked out the door, I don't even want to think about, what could have happened to me. So
how did it though? And if it did, and for how long did it change the dynamic of your relationship?
Yeah, no, it was definitely a weight. She was more worried for my safety at one point about me actually wearing the body wires, even more so than I was. I think just sort of this idea of it's not organized crime, but like if I'm wearing a wire in front of somebody who has significant means to cause harm to us, like, yeah, that's something that we should talk about. So she was more worried about that. And just I was just so difficult to be around. I was under stress. She was obviously under stress. Thank God she still had a job. At that point, she actually worked at Lehman Brothers, so she would lose her job a few months after this too, with the Lehman Brothers downfall. So a crazy time. So at one point, I'm just thinking about this now for the first time in a while. We were both out of work, 2009, and so it did not look good for us. we were in the middle of actually buying a house. We decided to go on with our life. Actually started a family. So we had our first daughter in the fall of 2009. She was born 4 days before Raj Rajaratnam was arrested, October 2009. So we decided to go on with our life, move to New Jersey, move out of the city, move away from all these people, and start over again. So, but it was a lot of like just sort of days and days of not even talking to each other sometimes, or she would ask, or I would volunteer about what I'm doing, but sort of she had to process it her own way. And so talk to her parents and friends and type of thing.
And during this time, and I'll get to the wire separately, but during this time, so after you've been approached, how, like, as you're walking through life day to day, are you thinking everybody's looking at me because they know, or are you thinking how are you dealing with it? Because you got a face to save at work, right? You got a face to save with, your friends, your neighbors,
Right.
your classmates, all these people. Like, how are you? This is a secret that you have to keep.
Yeah. At first, it was a double life because like the first year of my cooperation, I was still going to work, going to the office. Again, it's 2008, the worst year for the stock market in 75 years.
Right.
So that's not going well. My performance at work is terrible, and that's just stinks. And then I was actually kind of able to separate the two. Like I'd meet the FBI for lunch. They talk about a target that they wanted me to wear a wire on. We talk about that, and I go back to work. But I was definitely not doing a good job at all at work. I sort of checked out, and I think my boss could see that too towards the end of 2008. Just wasn't there in our meetings, wasn't even focused on things. And so I ended up leaving, just resigning February 2009. So a few months after that, just because I thought my name would actually become public at that point any day, and it didn't become public for another year. So I was able to manage it okay. But when my name became public, like that's when I thought, oh my God, like that was January 2010, where it was the front of the Wall Street Journal. Tipper X is Tom Hardin. CNBC runs those little ticker headlines, across the bottom of the screen all day.
Yeah.
All it said, I was like, just make it stop every minute. Tipper X identified as Tom Hardin. My phone's ringing off the hook. At this point, we had our daughter in 2009. I was a stay-at-home dad. My wife actually found another job pretty quickly after Lehman, so thank God she had an income. But she could go to work. I'm staying at home. Reporters are knocking at the door. At this point, I was so out of shape. I was well over 200 pounds, just letting myself go, holding my daughter. She's crying, like people are calling. But it turns out it's a 24-hour story. So the next day, there was something else that they covered. But just that first day was terrible.
Yeah.
But then,
and then there's
that,
probably, there's probably gaps, and then something else runs and you're like, damn, I thought it was going to be just one day, right?
Back in the press, because then somebody else is arrested. And they'll say also Tom Hardin was involved with these other cases. And, so Tom Hardin's back in the press. And once my name became public, Mike, I realized like anybody that knew me at all in any professional capacity had to say, oh my God, I know this guy, Tom Hardin. Like if somebody knew me back from Penn and we talked about stocks occasionally or saw them at conferences and they were never involved in any of this, because they had emails from me, their compliance team would say, why the heck
what's
do you
going
know this
on?
guy? And of course, they had no idea. They're like, I didn't know this guy was Tipper X and working with the FBI. So they would completely disassociate any relationship with me anymore, which I can't blame them. And they were told to do that. Like if you know anybody in these cases, drop that relationship. So I understand that, but I lost count, at least 50 Facebook friends, 50, 60 LinkedIn connections.
Have some of them come back now? Tom,
a few, like in that day, I got 4 emails from friends from Penn who are not in the industry just saying, Tom, I saw your name. Like, if you need to talk about this, let me know. And so, not surprisingly, you kind of figure out who your true friends are. And then over 10 years later, those are some of my 4 best friends now.
So Tom, you're wearing a wire, you're doing all this cooperation. So I'm sure there's like tons and tons of interviews, tons and tons of sit downs, of course, wearing the wire. And I'm thinking to myself, is it all about self-preservation? Is it about being a do-gooder, helping the government right or wrong? What were you feeling when you agreed and when you were doing this?
Yeah, and a couple things. I kind of felt like the FBI was giving me a chance to clean up the industry. So do-gooder part of it, not really like a whistleblower, but sort of a quasi whistleblower situation, but not because I was compelled to do the right thing, because I was sort of forced because of what I had done. But also I knew that these other guys, some of these guys' businesses was doing this 100% of their trade. So I kind of felt like if the FBI is giving me this chance to clean up the industry, I should help them out. But also it was self-preservation. Like I should just take the FBI's orders and maybe it'll all work out. I told myself stories over and over. I thought the FBI would hire me one day, which doesn't make any sense. You can't be a professional cooperator. Or I thought like maybe they'll drop the charges. Maybe I'll do such a good job. One day they'll be like, Tom, we've done such a good job. And then like
forget about it. Yeah, forget. Yeah.
You can imagine what my lawyer said. He's like, wait a minute, you waited a year to hire me.
You've done all this.
Who was your attorney before me? I said to my lawyer, I've never spoken to an attorney before. He's like, how many times you wear a wire, Tom? At that point it was 47. He's like, did you make millions of dollars? Are you like the target of this big conspiracy? I'm like, no, I made 46,000. And he's like, Tom, you're supposed to call me the first day the FBI approached you. I'm like, sir, this is my first time doing this. I'm just taking orders. And so he laid it out for me. He's like, the FBI is not dropping the charges. They're going to use you until they can't. And once they can't use you, your name's going to come out. And once they couldn't use me anymore, literally the next day, that afternoon, the next morning, it was all over the headlines. So.
And did your attorney put the kibosh on that, or was it something else?
Pretty soon after that, he said, Tom's done a lot for you guys, wearing the wire so many times. They wanted me to wire up on 2 friends I told on the 4th trade, who were really great friends, and I drew the line there. So these guys are great friends. I'm not going to do that to them. I'd rather go to prison if I have to than do that. And my lawyer said, I think you've done enough to be able to stop here. And so I told the FBI I'm done, and literally the next day, it's all in the headlines. And I had to call my brother. He worked at another hedge fund. I had to tell him about this. You can imagine how that went with him. He covered healthcare stocks. So he was never trading any of my stocks anyways. But the conversation that he had to have with his compliance officer and his boss, like, okay, tomorrow my Hardin's going to be all over the press. And so it's going to be a bad day for him. So the amount of people that it impacted down the stream, I didn't even think about when Tom Hardin is Tipper X. I'm just concerned about telling my parents and my in-laws. But anybody that knew me is like kind of freaking out, like, oh my God, this is just bad to even know this guy,
And where did the Tipper X tip for the Wall Street Journal and stuff come from? Did it come from the government, or like the initial one before you stopped cooperating? You were still cooperating at that time, if I remember.
Cooperating before my name was revealed.
In the Wall Street Journal, yeah, like you mentioned front page of the Wall Street Journal, where you were still cooperating at that time, right? Or
yes, I was still cooperating.
Yeah, okay.
I was still cooperating up until my name was released, and I was no longer able to cooperate, obviously, after that. So Roger Rotten was arrested a few months before my name came out. So 20 people arrested that day that he was.
Yeah.
And so in the Wall Street Journal, they had all these names, and there was one name in the middle called Tipper X. So I was still working undercover for the FBI, and they didn't even tell me that my name was Tipper X. Like I was reading the Wall Street Journal about all the arrests, and I told my wife, I think I'm this guy Tipper X. And so CNBC ran this story, who is Tipper X? They didn't mention me. I'm a nobody.
Oh, okay, yeah. So you were like the modern day Deep Throat. Yeah, you were.
Yeah, exactly. It was Tipper X.
Yeah.
And then I think at that point, to your earlier question too, I started going around a little bit, like looking over my shoulder. People must be onto me, like they must know that I'm Tipper X, but apparently not. It was shocking when it came out who Tipper X was in these cases, because I was the youngest guy of the 80 people they charged, and so how would that even be possible? You might think it's more of a seasoned guy who would be the guy who's in the middle of all this.
So how many times do you have to wear a wire before you're like used to it, Tom?
Just a short break here to ask you a question. Have you read my book? It's called Ownership: How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck, and it's available on Amazon, Audible, and everywhere else. If you're looking for inspiration that will help you unlock your greatness and potential, order or download your very own copy today.
Like I'm trying to think before you're used to it, like how many times?
Oh yeah, so probably a dozen.
Okay.
So if you're a target and then I'm meeting with you, I'd say, hey Mike, remember a few years ago, or a couple of these stocks I think you trade pretty well, Mike. Like, what would you say if you were ever asked as to why you made those well-timed trades? But if I'm asking you such a pointed question, you might look at me and think like, why is this young guy who I don't really know that well asking me about these trades from a few years ago? And so there was usually this awkward silence until the target would talk. I would fill the silence in because I'm so nervous. I must think now you're on to me. Like now the wire must be huge to you. I fill the silence. Oh, how about the football games this weekend or whatever? Just totally change the subject. The
Right.
FBI would play that back and they're like, Tom, like you're not doing a good job. Again, they're playing their scare tactics on me. Tom, if you can't do this, it's not good for you. And again, with them, I'm like, guys, it's my first time ever wearing a wire. Okay. Cut me some slack. And so eventually they said, even if that awkward pause after my question is a minute, I can't, I have to let the other person talk first. And so I got very good at being comfortable with silence. And so, those 30 seconds, which feels like forever, then the person would usually start talking. They'd look at me as like somebody that they wanted to mentor, a younger professional who was on their path. And they would usually start talking about either a contact they had, giving them information. So I was kind of shocked to see how many people would start talking. I guess I looked trustworthy or whatever, but
Right.
yeah.
But it's a good negotiation tactic as well to say something
Yes.
and then shut up, just wait.
Exactly. That's right. Or even as a professional speaker, making a point and
Oh, sure.
giving it a few
Pause. Yeah.
pause. But yeah.
Well, I find it super interesting that you've sort of embraced and adopted the TipperX name, which could have easily been something you want to run away from, right? I don't want
Sure.
don't want that at all. But and it probably took you a long time to decide to embrace that, I'm thinking. But now you've embraced it and you've, essentially done what a lot of people do that have made mistakes. You own up to the mistake. I've done this. You own up to the mistake, you pay your dues, and then you get on with life without, this mistake doesn't define who I am. It's a part of who I am, doesn't define who I am. I'm willing to talk about it because it could be helpful to you to know that I've had this experience, and you may have had lots of people have had the experience you had, they just never got caught.
Never got
right?
caught.
Never got caught.
Yeah.
And they can walk around like, oh, Tom's a, whatever, but they're the same as you. Just didn't get caught.
Not everybody gets caught. And so to your
Yeah.
point, name comes out January 2010. I'm not actually sentenced until February 2015. I'm sentenced to no prison because of my cooperation, but I'm still a convicted felon.
Yeah.
I had changed my life around. I lost a bunch of weight. I got into running marathons and ultra distance marathons. And so my first podcast interview was on the Rich Roll podcast, health and wellness podcast in 2015, right after I'm sentenced. An FBI agent heard that story and how I turned my life around. And the FBI later called me in 2016 to speak about my experience cooperating because they said they were building some new cases again. I asked the FBI, why the heck are guys doing this again? And they said, Tom, every 8, 9, 10 years, it's a new crop of people in the industry. We see the same behavior. You can rationalize anything. And I spoke at the FBI, and the FBI gave me the idea to go out and share the story. I was always an introvert, analytical guy. Wharton, I love my spreadsheets and my screen.
Yeah.
I don't like being in front of people, and especially talking about this story. But it's just sort of the 1,000 hours once you do it and do it over and over again. Like I got very comfortable talking about it and the impact I saw it have with people, especially what some of my first speaking engagements were speaking for free at any business school I could find that would have me in the New York area, or I went up to Boston, or I went down to Penn, Drexel, anywhere I could just drive to and tell the story with students was really rewarding because they kind of saw themselves in me. And I think what happened was I kind of walk in as TipperX. They think, what is this guy going to be? Some caricature, some criminal, some villain. And when they hear the story, they're like, that could be me. Or when professionals hear the story, to your point, but for the grace of God, it's not them on the stage talking about their experience in their career. So there's been a lot of good come from this. And so I'm so happy again. Yes, I could provide for my family now. And my attorney always told me, Tom, you're going to have to start your own company. So I looked at doing Amazon FBA before people were looking at that, like years and years ago. And I got tied up with my Alibaba supplier hijacking my listing. And so I just sort of threw that away. And then the FBI called and said, why don't you try speaking? And I actually asked them, am I allowed to get paid to speak? They said, yeah, you're not glorifying it. It's a training situation. It's a learning thing for people in the industry. And so I started asking to get paid early 2017, and then just asked for referrals. And so it spread all over the world in the 3 years before COVID. Obviously, it wasn't great to be a speaker during the last 2 years, but I pivoted to selling courses. And so about sharing my story and how that could impact accountants or attorneys or other professionals in their career, doing a revenue share with associations where these individuals have to have a certain amount of ethics credits. And so that was my COVID pivot. And now this year,
Mm.
everything's back strong. The speaking is back. The courses are doing well. And so that's kind of my journey to where I am today. Never had plans to talk about it. I always thought people that talked about their crimes weren't really owning it or really weren't taking responsibility. So I think it's very important, as we did, to talk about why it happened, what I was thinking, accept responsibility, and also have the opportunity to talk about it and provide some takeaways and some opportunity for people to put themselves in my shoes at that time. So
Yeah, it's to me, as I listen to you, it's like talking about, yeah, this is a story, and now here's what's important. How does it relate to you?
yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, we can all, anybody that's old enough too has had that experience in their career where you're at that line, you can go this way or this way, and then you often, ethics training today has a problem, and it's often philosophy based. So it's often these deontology or utilitarianism. I mean, Penn still teaches us this way, like it's all Greek philosophy based. I'm like, you have to bring psych 101 into ethics. Let's have a case study on everybody does it. Let's have a case study. I'm not hurting anybody if I buy a small amount of stock. Like that's something that like stays with people. When I speak at ethics professors, they're like, did anything you learned in ethics stay with you? I mean, here's my story. Obviously, I didn't do that well in ethics, but also it's not deontology or utilitarianism or virtue ethics. It's these psychological traps. Everybody does it. I'm not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
These are immaterial trades. Like that's what we should be teaching students. So,
and people can get very compartmental about ethics. Like you can be completely ethical at home and with your relationships, your friends and stuff, and at work, you could be 90% and you compartmentalize that. You go, well, for some of the reasons you said. So, so glad that you and your wife stayed together during this, because as you said, the vast majority that doesn't happen. And it's important, huge. So now you've got a book that you're working on and you're looking to become an entrepreneur on top of your speaking business. When do you feel like you're going to be back to where you believed you belonged before this all happened?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm not, I used to say, I threw my future away, sort of, threw my past away, sort of the situations where you throw your past away, Wharton School, great hedge fund, never be able to use that again. And you throw away my future. I thought I'd be this hedge fund manager making millions and millions of dollars, but I just turned 45 and I'm so happy where I am now is having a business, I think making a difference and giving a memorable keynote presentation for companies, for universities, having the opportunity to do this. So I think I'm probably happier than I would be if I was making millions and millions of dollars, because I don't think in that lifestyle, many of my friends who do make that kind of money don't really know their children. They've actually on their second wives. And so, that's other than, not having all that money, like where I am now is I'm very happy with I'm very content where I am. I'm not worried about the things I was worried about in my 20s. These guys are doing it. Now I'm part of that group. Like I'm so well aware of those biases that I had early in my career. Like I was so concerned about the other guys that were breaking the rules and getting ahead. I was so insecure, and I should have just been focused on myself, improving as an investor, improving in my line of work, self-improvement, and not worried about what other people are doing, because then I was drowning in insecurity. And so I think we all, as we get later in life, can give ourselves in our 20s a lot of advice. Now, whether in our 20s we would accept that advice, who knows? But I think, especially going through this experience, I look back, if I had been looking 10 to 15 years out, where do I want to be and work backwards? I think that's important for young people too. Don't get so caught in the short-term situation where you're not looking out in the years ahead. And people that are older, like the senior people in industries, if your subordinate is doing something, you have to ask about their short-term success. You can't not ask the questions. You have to ask questions that you may not know one of the answers to. And I think that applies, to any industry where my boss didn't ask me the questions. Maybe he would have caught me early, or maybe I think he knew what I was doing and didn't want to know the answers. And so that's not a good position to be in. So.
Yeah. Or maybe he liked the answer as long as he could somehow put a wall up between he and you, or his thought about it. And
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what he was thinking. Like, don't tell me about your success, but keep it up, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Tom, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your story and sharing your aspirations as well. I love the work that you're doing and the embracing of what's, this part of you, and you've basically flipped it on its head. So it's no longer Tipper X, insider trading is Tipper X, how can I help you become a better person while I become a better person as well? At least that's how I kind of see it.
Yeah, no, as again, turning 45, it feels like a big moment where maybe I'm halfway there, and so it's sort of, do I want to be remembered for these 4 trades in my 20s, or do I want to be remembered for the second career the industry has been so kind to give me, and all these companies that hired me have been kind to give me this opportunity. So I'm very grateful every day when I wake up now. And just as you said, 17 years married now, and 2 wonderful daughters. And so, yeah, it's things are very good, but thanks for having me on too today.
Yeah. You didn't say anything about the book. Sorry. What's happening with your book?
Oh yeah, so I'm still going through ghostwriters now on Upwork.
Okay.
Talking to Scribe also. So I know you mentioned that. I
published my book through Scribe as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So right now I'm at the ghost stage on Upwork, just interviewing people and trying to find the right voice. I don't think I'm going to be sitting down and closing the door for a while and writing it, because the speaking has really picked up for me, which I'm so happy it has this year. So. But I don't have a date on that. But I'm working on sort of quasi-memoir, but also lessons learned from all these speaking engagements the last few years, because there's so many things I've learned talking to companies who have had problems, or and how those can happen and how we can stop that from happening before. So I'm looking at what do I want this to be, a memoir plus lessons learned. So it's kind of an evolving process, but hopefully soon I'll have it all kind of rounded out.
Well, your friend Craig is an excellent writer. I mean, I read his book.
Yes.
I thought it was
Wonderful
phenomenal.
book.
So.
Wonderful book. Yeah.
Well, good luck. And again, thank you so much for being on the show, Tom.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me on. It's great.